Hello and welcome to the Your Rights Volunteer Movement. I'm going to show you two videos from another person's channel. I just yanked them off the channel, and by all means, if you like his videos, which I do, go to the description of this video, click on it, give him a good thumbs up and a comment on his channel for the work he did. But I'm using these videos as an illustration to show you a corruption and or something that needs to be changed within the U.S. under the Your Rights Volunteer Movement concerning the Electoral College, just to kind of show you how things are not really fair, and is also very educational for those of you who do not understand or know how the Electoral College currently works, and how it in a lot of cases can make your vote flat out not count, and will totally make you understand why the presidents, when going out campaigning for their elections, specifically focus on just a couple of states. You always hear them being in Florida and a couple other specific small states, and only if the states get divided equally between the two candidates would they ever even bother going to any of the other U.S. states, and I'd like to show you why. So let me show you them two videos and I'll be right back.
Election day, when Americans everywhere cast their ballot for the next president of the United States. Except, not really. Americans don't directly vote for president. So what's happening on election day then? It's a bit complicated because of something called the Electoral College. To keep things simple for now, think of the Electoral College as the collection of 538 votes that determine who the President of the United States will be. Why 538? Because that's the number of senators, 100, plus the number of representatives, 438 in Congress. Why are there 438 representatives in Congress? Stop asking so many questions right now, we're trying to keep this simple. These 538 votes in the Electoral College aren't given to the citizens directly, but are instead divided among the states. So how does the Electoral College give out the votes? Each state, no matter how populous or not, gets 3 votes to start. The remaining votes are given out roughly in proportion to the population of the states. The more people the state has, the more votes it gets. Here's a map of the United States showing the voting power each state has by making one hexagon equal to one Electoral College vote for president. Because Electoral College votes mostly, though not completely, scale with population, it's also a map of where people live, with a bonus given to the smaller states to make them a bit bigger than they would otherwise be. In early November, when citizens go to the polls, they aren't voting for president directly, but they're really telling their state how they want it to use its electoral votes. 48 of the 50 states give all their Electoral College votes to the candidate who wins a majority in their state. Take Florida, for example, which has 29 Electoral College votes. If a candidate wins a majority, no matter how small that majority, he gets all the votes. So the path to the White House is clear. Win enough majorities in enough states to get more than half of the Electoral College votes, and you get to sit at the big desk. That wasn't so complicated, you say? Well, there were a few details left out. The Electoral College loves states, but what about the 11 million Americans who don't live in a state? What happens to their vote, and where are these people hiding? There are about 600,000 in the District of Columbia, an area set aside specifically not to be a state so that the capital of the country would be free of local politics. For most of the United States history, people living in the district didn't get to vote for president. Then, in 1964, the Constitution was amended to give D.C. the same number of votes as the least populous state, Wyoming. So the Electoral College likes D.C., but you know who it doesn't like? The territories. The often forgotten Puerto Rico, Guam, U.S. Virgin Islands, and Northern Mariana Islands get no votes from the Electoral College because they aren't states and they don't have a special constitutional amendment to recognize them. Which is a bit odd considering they're part of the United States and everyone who lives there is a citizen, so for most practical purposes they're just like D.C., and 4.4 million people live in the territories. That might not sound like a lot, but it's more than the populations of Wyoming, Vermont, North Dakota, South Dakota, Alaska, and Delaware combined. But still, no votes from the Electoral College do they get. The whole situation with territories is extra strange when you consider the final group of Americans who don't live in the states, the 6.3 million Americans who live abroad. If you're a United States citizen who moves to a foreign country, you can usually send a postal vote to the last state that you resided in. But if you move within the United States to one of its territories, you lose your right to vote for president as long as you live there, making these the only spots on the whole earth where Americans are not allowed to vote for president. Actually, they're the only spots in the whole universe because American astronauts are allowed to vote from space. The last bit of Electoral College complication is the weirdest and has to do with the votes themselves. The state of Florida and all the others don't really give votes to a candidate. That's just a simplified way to think about it, because the reality of the situation is odd. What citizens are voting for on Election Day is a group of electors appointed by the political parties who choose the president on the citizens' behalf. The number of votes that a state gets from the Electoral College is actually the number of electors the state is allowed to send to a collegiate meeting to vote on who the president will be. What makes it odd is that while these electors promise they will vote for president as their state citizens want them to, they aren't required to do so. Electors are free to vote the way they want. While this has never swung an election, 87 times in the past electors have voted against the wishes of the very people who elected them. Why set up this crazy system where a small group of people essentially unknown to the general public are the ones who really decide on the president? Because in the 1700s, when the Electoral College was designed, the quickest way to send a piece of information was to write it down on a piece of paper, hand it to a guy on a horse, wish him "Godspeed, good sir," and hope he didn't get killed by Indians or die of dysentery along the way. Because information moved so slowly, and because the young country was so big, the idea was to send all the electors to Washington where they could have the most up-to-date information to make decisions for the people back home who wouldn't know the latest news. Though now, when we carry information on beams of light in fiber optic cables rather than on the backs of herd animals, this particular aspect of the Electoral College might seem a little out of date. Nonetheless, while most people think that the election for president takes place in early November, it doesn't. That's the election that determines who the electors will be. The 538 electors who are chosen then meet in early December, and they cast the real votes that determine who is the next president of the United States. In a fair democracy, everyone's vote should count equally, but the method that the United States uses to elect its president, called the Electoral College, violates this principle by making sure that some people's votes are more equal than others. The Electoral College is, essentially, the 538 votes that determine who wins the presidency. If these votes were split evenly across the population, every 574,000 people would be represented by one vote. But that's not what happens because the Electoral College doesn't give votes to people, only states, which has some unfair consequences. For example, there are 11.5 million people in Ohio, so, to fairly represent them, it should get 20 electoral votes. But the Electoral College doesn't give Ohio 20 votes, it only gets 18, 2 less than it should. Where'd those other votes go? To states like Rhode Island. Plucky Rhode Island has 1.1 million people in it, so it should have about 2 votes, but instead it gets 4. Those extra 2 votes that should be representing Ohioans go to representing Rhode Islanders instead. Why? Because, according to the rules of the Electoral College, every state, no matter how few people live there, gets 3 votes to start with before the rest are distributed according to population. Because of this rule, there are a lot of states with a few people that should only have 1 or 2 votes for president, but instead get 3 or 4. So Georgians, Virginians, Michiganders, and Jerseyites are each missing 1 vote. Pennsylvanians, North Carolinians, Ohioans, and Hoosiers are missing 2, Floridians are missing 4, New Yorkers 5, Texans 6, and Californians are 10 votes short of what they should get. Because of this vote redistribution, the Electoral College essentially pretends that fewer people live where they do, and more people live where they don't. An American who lives in one of these states has their vote for president count for less than an American who lives in one of these states. In some cases, the Electoral College bends the results just a little, but if you live in a particularly large or small state, it bends them a lot. 1 Vermonter's vote, according to the Electoral College, is worth 3 Texans' votes, and 1 Wyomingite's vote is worth 4 Californians. Now whoa, hold on there, son, you might be saying to yourself right now. You're missing the whole point of the Electoral College, is to protect the small states from the big states. Give the small states more voting power and the presidential candidates will have to pay them more attention in an election. If that's the goal of the Electoral College, it's failing spectacularly. Here's a graph showing the number of visits the presidential candidates paid to each of the states in the last 2 months of the previous election. If it looks like there are a few states missing, you're right. Only 18 of the 50 states received even a single visit from a candidate, and just 2 of those states, Maine and New Hampshire, have very small populations. The area of the country with the most small states is conspicuously missing. The Electoral College doesn't make candidates care about small states. But interestingly, the biggest states, California, Texas, and New York, are missing as well. So what's going on? Looking closer, just 4 states, Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, received a majority of the candidates' attention during the election. And if you follow the money, it's the same story. Why do candidates spend so much money and time in so few states? Because the way the Electoral College works forces them to do so. The elections are winner-take-all. As long as a candidate gets just over 50% of the popular vote in a state, he wins 100% of that state's electoral votes. That means winning by millions of citizens' votes is no better than winning by a single vote, so candidates are safe to ignore states where they poll with big margins. Instead, the Electoral College makes candidates intensely interested in the needs of just a few states with close races to the detriment of almost all Americans, which is why it should be abolished. But wait, you might say, won't abolishing the Electoral College and voting directly for president cause candidates to spend all their time in big cities? That wouldn't be fair to most Americans either. This sounds like a reasonable fear, but ignores the mathematical reality of population distribution. There are 309 million people in the United States, only 8 million of which live in New York, the largest city by far. That's 2.6% of the total population. But after New York, the size of cities drops fast. LA has 3.8 million people and Chicago has 2.7. But you can't even make it to the 10th biggest city, San Jose, before you're under 1 million people. These top 10 cities added together are only 7.9% of the popular vote, hardly enough to win an election. And even winning the next 90 biggest cities in the United States all the way down to Spokane is still not yet 20% of the total population. So unless there's a city with a few 100 million people hiding somewhere in America that's been left out of the census, the idea that a candidate can just spend their campaign jetting between New York, LA, and Chicago while ignoring everyone else and still become president is mathematically ludicrous. Want to see the real way to unfairly win? How you can become president with only 22% of the popular vote by taking advantage of the Electoral College today. Don't believe that's possible in a democracy? Just watch. Here's the action plan. Win the votes of the people who count the most and ignore the people who count the least. Start with Wyoming, the state where 0.18% of Americans live, but who get 0.56% of the Electoral College votes for president. And, because it's a winner-take-all system, you don't need all of them to vote for you, just half plus one, or 0.09%. Next up is the District of Columbia, where winning 0.1% of the population gets you an additional 0.56% of the Electoral College. Then add in wins in Vermont and North Dakota and Alaska. Notice how the votes you're getting to win the presidency go up much faster than the percent of the population who voted for you because of the Electoral College's rules. Next is South Dakota, then Delaware, Montana, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Maine, Hawaii, Idaho, Nebraska, West Virginia, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, Kansas, Arkansas, Mississippi, Iowa, Connecticut, Oklahoma, Oregon, Kentucky, Louisiana, South Carolina, Alabama, Colorado, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Maryland, Missouri, Tennessee, Arizona, Indiana, Massachusetts, Virginia, and New Jersey. Congratulations! By taking advantage of the unfair rules and winning states, not people, you've won a majority in the Electoral College even though 78% of the population voted against you. This is not democracy, this is indefensible. While this particular scenario is unlikely, if you have a voting system that allows losers to win, you shouldn't be surprised when they do. Not once, not twice, but thrice in American history, the candidate with the most votes from the people actually lost because of the Electoral College. 3 errors in 55-plus elections is a failure rate of 5%. Would anyone tolerate a sport where, by a quirk of the rules, there was a 5% chance that the loser would win? Not likely. Given how much more important electing the President of the United States is, that's a rather dangerously high percentage of the time to get it wrong. If we abolish the Electoral College and simply let citizens vote for the President directly, all of these problems will go away and everyone's vote will be equal.
Ain't that insane? That was set up so long ago and is so outdated. Our presidents have been using it, and the Democrats and Republicans have been using it against a lot of the independents that originally, from time to time, actually attempt to become president. But because they don't have the financial backing or anything like that, they have no chance. Even if they went to every single state other than the ones that the Democrats and Republicans pretty much have locked down, they couldn't hope to win. Okay, we need to go to an every vote counts system. Just like the Your Rights volunteer movement will be a every vote count system on deciding whether or not laws or individuals become elected in advance of the election. That way we know for a fact we have the support to do what we want or need to do, and we will know in advance what the outcome of the election would be and could demand an audit should it be something other than what we know it will be, because we already know for a fact that we have 51% of the majority vote within the state or the country. Alright, so, nobody likes to talk about civil war or anything like that. But I'll tell you what, if the U.S. is so corrupt that they're going to attempt to prevent the overall population from voting, which is what the entire principle of the United States is all about, and designed specifically by our forefathers that came from oppressed governments, that designed it originally so that everyone would have a say-so in the government. But unfortunately, over the years, left it up to the rich people to basically control and dictate over what's going on, and wound up with such corruptions that we have today that are evident and visible in most cases, that we need to actually bring it back to its original balance. Just like when the day the forefathers made the U.S., that's where we can get back to, eliminating all the corruption. Only difference is there won't be a Democratic Party and there won't be a Republican Party. There will be a single independent government with everybody on the same page and everybody for everybody. No need for corruption. Right? It's so simple. It is so simple. You guys can do it. I believe in you. We can make this happen. A lot of individuals that contact me on this channel have concerns for their safety, and I try to explain to them that there's absolutely no laws that we would be breaking. Everything that we are doing here on the Your Rights Vigilante, specifically in the U.S., is 100% guaranteed within our Constitution. And if the government itself tries to deny this on our part, or interfere on our part for doing this, then we need to seriously remove the government by any means necessary, even if it is a civil war. Because the government would be basically stating that this is no longer the United States, it's the United Dictatorship. I love my country, and I love my government, even with their flaws, but I will not live within a dictatorship that tells me I do not have a say-so or a vote in anything, and I'm not allowed to even attempt to have others get in and make a vote for something. Till next time.